Hey, everybody. All right, so this is kind of new for me. I have just been wanting to get outside, and it's been raining nonstop here in Arkansas. So, trying to at least enjoy it while it's not raining. So, welcome if you're new here. My name is Coach Hall, and I go live each Sunday. We've only got one more left between now and the upcoming AP Lang exam. I'll be going live throughout the week as well. If you have AP Lang questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. While we're getting started here on YouTube, I'm also going to be going live on TikTok. So we can answer questions there as well. So feel free to just ask whatever questions that you have. I know like a week away, people are starting to get, I don't want to say like they're panicking, but we're starting to really think about the test for sure right now, which is a good thing. Got plenty of time left to study. All right, awesome. So we are live on both TikTok and YouTube. For those watching, feel free to hit that like button and post a question in the chat or just hop on in and say hello. I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you're a teacher or a student, I'd love to know how I can help you. So, with the exam being a week away, I think one of the most common questions that students ask at this point is, how can I study? Like, what can I be doing to be ready for the upcoming exam? And there's a few things that I think students can and should be doing over the next week. Now, obviously, if you are taking other AP tests, like a lot of them are in that first week. So you might need to prioritize those. And if you're studying for a different AP test like APUSH, that can be a great way to study for AP Lang as well, because it's possible that you might use some of that historical evidence in your argument essay. So if you're just joining, we're talking about some different options for studying for the upcoming Lang exam. Feel free to ask questions in the comments. Something else that you could be doing if you're worried about multiple choice is using released SAT tests to practice. The ACT is pretty similar, and I think it works well also. But if you're looking for extra multiple choice practice, that's one way to do it because the questions are going to be very similar. So it can be super helpful to use released SAT tests, especially for the reading, because you're going to want those nonfiction passages. For the writing MCQ, something to consider would be the SAT writing and language questions that have a question stem above it. Those can be good practice as well. There are some questions from the College Board that are publicly available, but there aren't very many. So that's like another issue that students sometimes have, is just getting access to good questions. If your teacher uses AP Classroom and they're willing to like release those tests and open up those tests for you, that can be a great option as well. Something else that students can do to study in the coming week would be, I would honestly just start kind of honing in your knowledge for question 3. So think about some historical figures that you could write about, historical events, and really brush up on your knowledge so that you could write about them specifically. Thank you so much for liking the live over on TikTok. If you are watching on YouTube, I would love it if you would like the live there as well. And feel free to ask any questions that you have in the comments, because I wanted to go live for about an hour or so and answer questions that people might have. Right now, we're just kind of chatting about ways to prepare for the upcoming exam. So we talked about multiple choice and how you could use the SAT questions or stuff on AP Classroom if you have access to it. We're talking about how you can prepare for question 3 by just kind of broadening your knowledge, focusing on like historical figures, events, current events, things that you could write about well. Something else that if you haven't done it recently, you might consider doing is you might consider making like your own mini mock exam. And so what you could do for this is you can go to look at the past exam prompts and choose ones that you haven't written. Ideally, they would be like something you've never seen before. And you could time yourself. So if you want to do the full test for 2 hours and 15 minutes for the FRQs, that's great. If though you would prefer to just do like 1 or 2 timed essays, that's fine as well. It's really good at this point in the year to be practicing a timed essay where you haven't read the prompt first, just because that can be really helpful to kind of like simulate the test. So that's definitely something that I'm having my students do, is they're writing like 1 more essay just to get ready for the upcoming exam. Awesome. Thanks for the follow as well. What are your thoughts on pre-AP English? I'm currently in pre-AP English 1. So pre-AP English, we used to call at our school, we used to call it pre-AP. Now we have to call it honors, because pre-AP now means that there's like a College Board curriculum. I think it can be very helpful. I believe that honors classes and pre-AP classes can help students get prepared for AP. So it can be a good choice if you're looking to be challenged, if you're looking to help be prepared for college. Now, that's not to say that if you don't take these classes, you won't be prepared, because that's not true. However, I do think pre-AP classes and also AP Lang can really help you with nonfiction and your writing skills, which most people are going to encounter more of that in their college classes anyway. So AP Lit, for those that are a little unsure of the difference, AP Lit does like poetry, short fiction, and novels, which can be great. But typically in college, you only take like maybe one class that covers those things, unless you're an English major, maybe one or two classes. But the bulk of what you're going to read, if you're not an English major, is going to be nonfiction. So I think AP Lang is super helpful in that regard. Let's see. I'm going to miss AP Lang so much. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad you're enjoying the class. Can you clarify the difference between concessions, refutations? Okay, yes, that's a great question. So a concession is a form of addressing the counter argument. So let's start there. In a synthesis essay or possibly an argument essay, you might want to address the counter argument. It can lead to sophistication, but that's not guaranteed. So please don't force it. If you do not have enough time, you don't need to include it. If you don't think it's going to strengthen your essay, you don't need to include it. But the counter argument is basically the opposite side, like what your opponents would argue. And the idea is that if you can figure out what they would say and then refute it, then you're strengthening your own argument. So there's two ways that we can commonly do this. The first is a counterclaim and rebuttal. These tend to be a little bit more harsh or like a little bit more direct. So for example, it's like if you said, those in favor of this topic argue this, however, they failed to consider this. So it's like, here's what other people say, but here's why they're wrong. And you can develop that more than just two sentences, but that's kind of like a little structure of what it could look like. A concession is a little bit softer, and it's actually very useful in like everyday, or not arguing in a bad way, but everyday discussion. So a concession is when you acknowledge the merit of the other side. So merit like is the good stuff. So it's basically trying to show, hey, it's not all bad, but my side's better. So I'm able to maturely say, hey, here's what's good about the other side, but ultimately that side's wrong. Here's what we need to consider. So a concession could look something like this. It could be like, yes, or certainly, or while it's true that. So you're acknowledging the merit of the other side. And you can even throw in a because clause. Like you could say like, yes, it's true that whatever the opposite is, because, and you could say why. And then you would have to follow it up with what we call the refutation. So it would be something like, one would be remiss not to consider this, or however, ultimately we need to focus on this. So those two things can go together as well. So that's kind of the concession is like acknowledging the merit of the other side. The refutation is what follows, and that's where you go back to your side. And they have to be a pair, because if you just concede and don't refute it afterwards, then you've kind of like debunked your own argument. So that's why they're a pair. Okay, we've got a question over here on YouTube. For the argument essay, how many pieces of evidence is enough? Okay, so the minimum is 2, because if you do 2 body paragraphs and you have 1 per paragraph, the minimum is 2. So if you have 2 examples that you truly believe can stand alone, great. Otherwise, some students like to do 2 pieces of evidence per paragraph for argument. So if you had 2 body paragraphs, you would have 3 or 4 pieces of evidence. If you do 3 body paragraphs, then it could be, 4 to 6, I suppose. So really just decide, okay, how much time do I have? How can I develop my ideas most fully? Sometimes 2 examples in the same paragraph is more convincing, especially if you can transition well between the 2. So I would say the minimum pieces of evidence for argument would be 2. Most students do 3 or 4 though. I've been told that the concession refutation to be super brief and tack it along in the conclusion. Is that good? You can technically put it anywhere. I've seen some students put it early on, like first body paragraph. I've seen some students have it be their third body paragraph. It really depends on where it's going to be most logical. Just sticking it in the conclusion for the sake of doing so isn't necessarily the best idea. We want to make sure that where we're putting it is logical and necessary, but technically it can go anywhere. What are some ways to grade FRQs? Okay, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you want to know like how to score yourself if you're writing an essay. First, there are rubrics out there. The rubrics can be a little confusing, but most students very easily get the thesis point. The hard part is row B, which is evidence and commentary. So you really want to look at the language of the rubric. And I would also look at some student samples because, especially for recent prompts, they have almost like one for each score. So you could say, okay, is my writing closer to this sample or this sample? And that can really help as well. It is sometimes hard for students to grade their own. Sometimes students are too lenient. Sometimes they're too harsh. Because honestly, as teachers, sometimes it's a little tricky. Like in my class, I give a lot of half points because I'm like, okay, I can see you're trying. So you're not here yet, but I want to reward you with a half point. If you're looking for additional help and like tutoring and stuff, if you're watching on YouTube, I have some links in my description box for tutoring on OutSchool. OutSchool is an online learning platform. And I do group and one-on-one sessions over there. And I've got some sessions coming up this week for students who are looking to have essay review help, or if you want my help answering questions about AP Lang and you want like personal feedback on how to plan or how to prepare. I've got a game plan workshop over there as well. I just did one actually about an hour ago with a student. It was super helpful. So if you're interested in personalized help and you're watching on YouTube, definitely check out the description. If you're watching on TikTok, the links to that are in my profile. And if you have trouble accessing it, you're welcome to reach out and I could send you those links. Is it too late to study? No, it's not too late to study. You still okay, here's the thing about Lang, which I kind of like compared to other classes. And it's not that other classes are bad, but like for classes like APUSH, you kind of need to be reviewing throughout the whole year. And yeah, you can cram, but there's a lot of stuff to memorize. The thing about AP Lang, and this is maybe why I like it, but maybe why other people don't, is that you don't really have to be memorizing anything. It is very skills based, not knowledge based. So as long as you've been practicing these skills throughout the year, yes, there's things that you want to remember on test day, but you can be refining those skills now and it can still help you prepare. So you're not too late. You're definitely not too late. All right, let's see. Let's see what questions we have. Someone said I got a 7 out of 6 on my argument essay, and I was like, what? So maybe your teacher was trying to reward you for doing really well. I've never given a 7 out of 6. That's impressive. I do give like the half points, like I said, though. Do you know if there's a requirement for the number of devices in rhetorical analysis? So technically you need at least 2 choices because it says choices plural. So you need at least 2. Some people do 3. But yeah, definitely have 2 for sure. Got a 6 out of 6 on the synthesis. That's awesome. The sophistication point is really hard to earn, so congrats on that. Any tips on MCQ? Yeah, so for multiple choice, I think the biggest thing is pacing. So a lot of students really struggle with, especially the reading section in their pacing. Honestly, most of my students are better at the writing MCQ. Like their MCQ scores are good, but when we broke it down in class last week, and this is something that I do in my game plan workshop, if you're interested in that, is I had them look at, okay, you answered 45 questions. How many did you get right? But then more specifically, how many of them were reading questions that you got right? How many were writing questions that you got right? And most of my students, though not all of them, had a slightly higher average or percentage for the writing questions. And in some cases, kids were having to really rush through those questions because time was about to be called. So what we decided is in those cases, what they're going to do is they're just going to take the test a little bit out of order. You can answer the questions in that section in any order. So when it's multiple choice time, you can only be working on multiple choice. However, you can go to passage 3 and start there if you want to. And that's where the writing questions start. So that's what they were going to do. A couple of them tried it and it did increase their score by a couple points, which was helpful. So play to your strengths for the MCQ because it's possible that you might be better at like the writing ones. Please answer every question. This goes for the essays too, like attempt all essays. It is actually like sort of heartbreaking to see when people just leave it blank. Like, please write something. Don't just skip over it. But I'm assuming if you're here watching this live, you're not the type of person that would just leave it blank. But for multiple choice, whether you're taking paper or digital test, just make sure you answer each question because at the very least, even if it's a complete guess, you at least have a 20% chance of getting it right. Whereas if you leave it blank, 0%. And if you can use process of elimination and kind of get rid of some of those throwaway answers, those answers that are sort of obviously wrong, and kind of narrow it down, then you've increased your odds. I do have a video on YouTube that goes into multiple choice much more thoroughly. It's called like AP Lang MCQ, and it's probably the most recent full video on my channel. I've been doing a lot of YouTube shorts, so those might pop up as well. But the MCQ video I put out like a week ago. It's kind of an updated version of some of my previous videos. And I think that would really help if you have MCQ questions, because it kind of goes through like, here are some of the common mistakes people make in reading, and here's some of the ones that they make in writing. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. Your videos have been super helpful. Thank you so much, Joshua. I'm so glad to hear that. When I write the argument essay, I often use historical examples because I'm an APUSH and AP Gov. How deep or specific is too deep? That's a great question. First of all, awesome for taking multiple AP classes. I love to see like the kids who you can tell they're in APUSH or AP Gov sometimes by the way they write like about these examples. So I guess the question is, what point is like overkill? What point is too much? We want specific evidence. So any like proper nouns that you can give, names, dates, anything like that is helpful. Please also remember that regardless of whether you're talking about history or personal experience or pop culture, assume that the reader doesn't know what you're talking about. So give a couple sentences of context. So you should have, the minimum would be one sentence, but ideally like 2 to 3 sentences where you explain the evidence that you're talking about. I told my students last week, write your essay like you're writing to an English teacher. So use more formal language, but explain stuff like you're talking to a 10-year-old. And what I meant by that was like, they can't infer. So one of my students was saying, well, sometimes I feel like my commentary is really repetitive, or I feel like it's really obvious what I'm saying. But the thing is if I'm reading your paper, I can't use my own knowledge. So for instance, last week I was reading a paper about Martin Luther King. Well, the person just kind of assumed that everyone knew who that was, which probably most people do, but they never said he was an activist. They never said like anything. It was just like, oh, MLK. And so the evidence was not specific enough because they didn't actually tell us what we were supposed to consider about his life. And so for those who have a background in like APUSH or AP Gov, be concise, but give us a couple sentences to explain it, like what the example is, and then follow that with more sentences of commentary. So we want to have more commentary than evidence if possible. So like 3 to 5 sentences of commentary per example, that can be really helpful. But yeah, definitely if the prompt lends itself to that, lean into those historical examples if you have that class. And if you're like, wait a minute, I'm not taking APUSH, what can I do? You can write about personal experience. You can write about pop culture. You can write about current events. So like lean into whatever makes sense to you. If you're looking for a 3, how many MCQ and FRQ points did you have? Okay, so basically this is kind of a general range, so it could fluctuate. But if you're trying to get a 3 composite and be kind of solidly in that 3 range, I tell my students I want to see 23 out of 45 for MCQ. So like basically like 51%. And I want to see 4 out of 6s on the essays. And that puts them sort of reasonably comfortably into that 3 composite. So if you got a 22 and not a 23, but you still made 4s, are you okay? Yeah, probably. If you did, let's say 26, but you got a 3 on one of your essays instead of a 4, are you okay? Yes, probably. So it's just kind of a range there. All right, let's see. Let's look at some of these questions over here on TikTok. This is great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for the likes, by the way. Last night I had like a personal record. I think we hit, it was at least 6K, but I think by the end we are at like 10K likes, which I don't know, not that likes actually matter, but it was still kind of cool. I appreciate it when people tap their screen. On the MCQ, when they ask whether to add in sentences or sources, how relevant on the topic does it have to be? Okay, so if I'm understanding your question, are you asking about like when they say like the writer wants to add the following sentence here and then they tell you what the sentence is? If that's what you're asking, it does need to be helpful. It does need to be on topic. So we only add sentences to a paragraph for the MCQ questions if it's on topic and it's providing useful information. If it's like off topic, we don't add it. If it's providing information that's already been well established, we don't add it. Same thing for like deleting, because sometimes they'll ask about adding a sentence, other times they'll ask about deleting a sentence. If the information is redundant, yes, delete it. If the information is necessary to the paragraph, don't delete it. So for those, I tell my students to basically like look at it first and say like yes or no and why before they read the multiple choice question or the answers. So basically, it's what we do in class is we'll look at it and I'll say, okay, the writer wants to add the sentence here. Should they do so? So we read the sentence, we go back to the paragraph to read the whole paragraph. Don't just read like the sentences around it, read the whole paragraph. So we read the paragraph and I'll ask them like, okay, should we add this sentence here? And then the yes or no. And then the students will tell me, and then I'll say, okay, why? And usually what they say matches an answer choice. So that's a way to kind of speed up the process, because then you don't have to go through all your yeses and all your nos. Because it's a 5 question or 5 answer choice thing, you have A through E on AP Lang. There's not necessarily like if they do 3 yeses and 2 nos, they're not trying to tell you it's definitely a yes. They just break it up 3 and 2 because it's 5. So there's not really a like a hidden clue there. Let's see. I think I skipped a couple. What should the commentary be for argument? Okay, so for argument, you're going to be, well, really all commentary is you explaining the significance of your evidence. But specifically for argument, you've chosen these examples. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, okay, why did I choose this example? How does this example actually prove my thesis? And you want to spell it out for the person reading your paper. Use the word because. Use verbs like illustrates, highlights, emphasizes. That can be very helpful. I would also say, like, think about, for your commentary, think about the lesson or like the message behind the example. So like, what are people supposed to learn from this? Especially for those like philosophical prompts, which most of them have been very philosophical recently, like the value of this topic. Think about like, what are people supposed to learn from this example? What should we aim for to get a 5? Okay, so you're going to need approximately like 73 to 100 points out of a maximum of 100. And so each of your MCQ is going to be worth 1 point. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your essay scores and you're going to multiply them by 3.0566. There's online score calculators if you don't want to do all the math. But to get a 5, you should be aiming for approximately at least 60% on your MCQ, ideally 65% or higher, and at least a 5 out of 6 on your essays. And that should put you at like possibly the lower end of a 5 composite. So that would kind of be like ballpark. Can you talk about what the MCQ is like? So the first 2 passages are going to be reading passages, which are reading comprehension. Those are the ones where it's like, what is the function of this paragraph? Or what does this word mean? I recommend that in a lot of cases, students, they sometimes benefit from reading the questions first. If you've never tried this, try it with an SAT passage between now and the exam, because some of my students are like, yes, this is so helpful. And other students are like, nope, it screws me up. But here's why it could be helpful to you. Sometimes, especially if you feel like you're kind of like if you describe yourself as like a slow reader, or if you're like, you know what, I have to go back and reread all the time and it's slowing me down. If you read the questions first, you're reading with a purpose. So this is not how I was taught to take tests in high school. And I wish I had been told this, because I started doing it when I was taking like tests in grad school. And I felt like I was much quicker and like more confident with my answers, because sometimes what would happen is I'd go read the passage first with my previous technique. And then like they'd ask a question about like, why did so-and-so do this? And I'm like, I don't even remember reading that. So then I'd have to go back to the passage and find it, and it would take too much time. So what you can do is you can read the questions first, not the answer choices. Do not read the answer choices, because 4 out of the 5 are wrong. It's going to screw you up. So just look at the questions and say, okay, you know what? I have a question about paragraph 1, or they're going to want to know what this word means. So that can be helpful, because sometimes they put words in the passage where you might not know what they mean, but if they don't ask you a question about what that word means, just keep reading and ignore it. I did this with my sophomores last week because they were preparing for state testing. And so we did like read the questions first. And as we were reading the passage, people were like, oh, that's the answer for number 6 right there. And so they felt so much more confident. So that's something to consider for multiple choice, but please try that before the test. Don't just do that on test day. Let's see, other multiple choice tips. Just know that they try to create distracting question answers, like answer choices. So if the answer choice is partially right, but it's not totally right, don't assume that you read the passage wrong. They make them like that to trick you. So for instance, I was doing a question with a student earlier today, and one answer choice was like good men and bad men. It was an SAT question. And then that was the answer that the student chose. And then the second answer choice that she was deciding between was like, something about like men and something else. And like technically it never said anything about good or bad. It was talking about men in the passage though. And so just because it was talking about men, that was kind of distracting in the answer choice, but it never said good or bad. So we had like the right answer was the other answer. So sometimes they'll put a word in there that's from the passage or whatever to try to trick you. So really ask yourself, is this actually answering the question being asked? Because that's what they do sometimes is they'll make an answer that's like partially right, but it's not 100% right. And those can be super distracting. Or they'll give you an answer that is correct. It's in the passage, but it's like not in the part that they're asking about. So just double check those things. On YouTube, if you're looking for like extra help in tutoring, if you check the description box of the live, there should be links to my tutoring stuff. Let me just try to paste it in the YouTube chat. If you're on TikTok and you would like additional help, please check out the links in my profile or in my bio. There's certain words you can't say on TikTok, so it's just hard to like not say them. Okay, let's see. Mm-hmm. All right, there we go. Whoops. Well, let me. Oh, it says it's too long. Hold on. Let me put it in 2 separate messages. Okay, this should be. Oh, it still says it's too long. Oh, that's annoying. Okay, well, here's one. It'll let me do that one. Okay, now let me do the other one. Sorry on TikTok. I don't mean to be ignoring y'all. Feel free to keep those questions coming, and I will absolutely answer them. But yes, for those that had questions about like tutoring or where can I get extra help, I do tutor on a place called OutSchool, and I have some workshops coming up for students. And the thing about it is that with new sign up, you get a credit. And so the class essentially becomes like free to you. So I make the class the same cost as the credit that you'll get. So in most cases, you don't have to pay anything, or I try to keep the prices super affordable. So yeah, so Joshua on YouTube, if that link works, please let me know. And then if you have questions, feel free to type those in the chat and I'd be happy to answer them. Should commentary for argument essays include persuasive elements that we would analyze in RA? It can. That actually is one way to get sophistication, is by like, I guess, essentially making good rhetorical choices in your own writing. It's hard to do though. But I have seen some students use like a very thoughtful like comparison or something, or like very strong detail, and that kind of elevated their writing. So yes, technically you can make rhetorical choices in your writing to elevate your score. On the MCQ, oh, I think I answered that one because it's about adding sentences in. There's a question about adding in sources. I don't think I've seen that one. I've seen adding in sentences though. Yeah, I don't know. Was the one where you had to add in a source, was that on AP Classroom or was that in like a test prep book? I'm just curious because I don't think I've seen an add in a source one, but there's questions on AP Classroom I haven't read. Tips for the writing MCQs. Okay, great question. I would say, okay. So a lot of the questions are going to be things like, should you add this sentence, yes or no, or like knowing transition words. Some transition words that you should know, just because like you might not readily know how to define them, but you've probably heard them before. One is subsequently. which means like afterward. I've seen that be an answer choice a couple times. It doesn't mean it's right, but know that subsequently is like afterward or next. So like we did this and then subsequently we did this. Another one is moreover. And that one literally just means furthermore, but some students are like, oh, what does that mean? So I remember it because furthermore, moreover, they mean the same thing. So that can be helpful, is knowing some of those transition words. A lot of the ones that are super common, like therefore and additionally, and those are sometimes answer choices too. So you'll want to know those words. Similarly, conversely, however, just make sure you're comfortable with like knowing what those words mean. I'm trying to think. Another common question on the writing MCQ is like they want to add a sentence to the beginning. So it's like the writer wants to add a sentence to the beginning of the passage. And then they'll say something like, they want it to be engaging or something like that. So you want, if they ask you about like descriptive or engaging, you really want to look at the word choice, because a lot of the answer choices that are wrong are going to be really bland sentences. So look for the keywords in the question like that. So if they say like the writer wants to add an engaging sentence to the start of the essay, choose the answer choice that is a good start. Like it has to be on topic, but it also has to have good word choice, things like that. So sometimes they give you clues in the questions themselves. Do you have a live stream schedule or is it random times? Okay, great question. So I will be live next Sunday at this time as well. I've been going live on YouTube and TikTok every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And I see some of you from previous lives. And so it's great to see you back. I will be going live hopefully later tonight as well. I'm not sure what time. It kind of depends on what time my kiddos go to bed and I get everything done. But I'm going to be trying to go live every day between now and the test. It's possible that I might miss a day, but I'm definitely going to try. So if you have questions that I haven't answered, and I'll stay on live for a while, but if you have to go or something, feel free to ask those questions by commenting on a recent video, especially on TikTok. I can reply with a video to help you out. And like, because honestly, a lot of the questions people ask benefit others as well. So feel free to ask questions there, or just make sure you're following on whichever platform you're on. On YouTube, make sure you turn your notifications on. That's the little bell. And that way, it'll tell you when I go live. I think TikTok kind of automatically does it. But yes, I'll be going live plenty of times between now and the exam. The night before the exam, at 7 p.m. Eastern, I'll be going live with Tim Freitas from the Garden of English on his channel. I'm going to see if I can go live on TikTok at the same time and kind of like, because it'll be on his channel. I'm going to see if I can kind of use my phone to pick it up. I don't know. It might work. It might not. But we'll try that. So I'll definitely be going live multiple times. And then also if you're a junior and you're like, okay, I just need to get through this AP Lang test, make sure after the test you stick around, because this summer I'll be going over some college prep content. So if you happen to want help with like college applications, I'll be doing tips and stuff like that. And then when this next school year starts, I go back to AP Lang. So and if you have friends that are in like the year below you that are going to be taking AP Lang next year, please tell them about my channel. Please tell them about my TikTok. That way I can help more students as well. All right, let's see. How do you come up with examples for argumentative? Okay, so I use the acronym CHORES. Some teachers use ReHugo. What's the other popular one? Gophers. There's another one, but they all mean the same thing. So CHORES stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, and science. And these are just kind of like categories of evidence. You do not need to have one from every category, but it's just a way to help you kind of brainstorm like, okay, what current events do I know that relate to this topic? Or what historical events do I know? You can write about personal experience. So some prompts really lend themselves to that. Other prompts, not so much. If you're going to write about personal experience, make sure it's meaningful. Make sure you provide enough context. So we were talking about this before, but like regardless of what you talk about, at least one, if not 2 or 3 sentences to explain the evidence. Like give us the backstory. Pretend that we don't know. Even if it's somebody super famous, pretend we don't know. That's where you can really shine if you have that like scientific knowledge, or if you have that historical knowledge, or even like I've read some really good evidence where it was like a TV show that I had never heard of. Like I've read some from students where it's like like is it manga or manga? I don't know if but anyway, like they'll talk about those and like they'll tell like a few sentences about the plot and the characters, and then kind of explain how that fits. I've had some students write about like famous athletes and things like that. So make sure that you are like choosing evidence that you could write about specifically. What I like to do is before I plan my evidence, I ask myself kind of like open-ended questions about the prompt. So let's say the prompt is the value of disobedience. Okay, that's an old one from a couple years ago, more than a couple. I tell my students, okay, ask yourself, when is disobedience valuable? Why is disobedience valuable? Come up with those reasons and then come up with brainstorm some evidence. For some people, that works better. Some people like to do evidence first, but we really want to be thinking about these specific examples. And honestly, just like brain dump, like info dump, write down everything that comes to mind. You can write chores on your paper if you want to. And just, then go through and say, okay, nope, I can't write about this one specifically. Or, you know what, that historical example pairs really well with that current event. Let me put both of those in the same paragraph. So planning your essay in advance can really help. But sometimes like you might not come up with a ton of ideas right away. And so if you just keep adding to it, that can be helpful and it might lead to better ideas. Sometimes it's like, nope, I've just got 4 ideas. This is what we're working with. And that's okay too. Is it bad to repeat one? For instance, having 2 paragraphs about historic examples? No, it's not. That's a great question. I actually had this student last year. He was really sweet. He came up to me in a panic in the middle of an argument essay last year. I was like a timed right, and he was like, "I'm gonna fail this essay." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "I can only come up with historical examples." And I was like, why would you fail? I guess I had not clearly explained to them that it's okay if you have all historical examples or like all current events. I try not to encourage all personal experience, but here's the thing. We want you to choose the evidence that is most convincing, that you can write about the best. And for some of you, if you're in APUSH, like which the student was, excuse me, that was what was fresh on his mind. So just use what you feel is most convincing, but it's okay to have multiple examples from the same category. In the same regard, if you have different categories, make sure that you're transitioning well. I have a video on my channel where it's like sentence frames for argument and synthesis, and I address this in that video. But basically, like if you're going from like historical to current events or current events to historical, you want to acknowledge that transition. So you could say something like, whatever the topic is not just limited to whatever your historical evidence is. It's also prevalent in current events. And then you could tell us the current event. So kind of like, because I've had some students write about some really random stuff, but it worked because they had good transitions. Okay, let's see what we got here. Welcome to those that are just joining. Feel free to ask whatever questions you have. How can we talk about logos, ethos, pathos, and rhetorical analysis without it being too broad? Great question. If you want more info about this, I'll answer your question for sure. Please go on YouTube and look up Coach Hall Writes Rhetorical Appeals. I have a video about this that I think will be very helpful for you because it's not that we don't want you to write about rhetorical appeals, but we need you to understand that rhetorical choices create appeals. So if you say, okay, I know this is logical, right? Instead of saying uses logos or appeals to logic, which is slightly better, ask yourself how you know it's logical. Like, what are they doing where you know it's logical? Sorry, there's something weird on my computer. So is it that they're providing facts and statistics? Because if the example, or if that's like what's logical is that they have facts or statistics, then that's your choice. So write about that and then talk about how it's logical. The one that people kind of mess up on a lot is pathos or pathos, which is emotion. Please don't just drop the word pathos into an essay. First of all, we need to know which emotion it was or is. Like, is it fear? Is it nostalgia? Is it, let's see, what's another common one? Patriotism. Because if you just say pathos or pathos, then you just said, hey, they appealed to emotion, but so many people appeal to different emotions for different reasons. So instead of saying appeals to emotion, always tell us which emotion, but better yet, tell us what they're actually doing to appeal to that emotion. Usually it's through their word choice. and also possibly detail. So typically with nonfiction, we say detail and not imagery, but they're kind of the same thing. So that could be a way to do that. And then with credibility, are they using first person pronouns? Like, are they saying I and me a lot to assert their credibility? If they're repeating it a bunch of times, then you could use repetition and talk about how it builds their credibility, things like that. So that's how you can start to talk about logos, ethos, pathos without it being too broad, is ask yourself, okay, I know it's logical. What are they actually doing to make it logical? That's your choice. And that's what you want your main idea to be. And then in your analysis, then talk about how it's logical. Hopefully that helped. What is a conversation in synthesis? Okay, so we call synthesis a conversation of sources. And basically what that means is that we want you to recognize that the sources work together. So some of them are going to be in favor of the topic, some are going to be against, some are going to be neutral. So you want to find like overlap, like similarities or differences that you can use. So like, for instance, let's see, I'm trying to use one that's like kind of a popular one. Okay, the cursive writing prompt. One of the sources was talking about how like cursive writing is really tedious and really boring. Okay, let's just say that's a quote from one of the sources. Okay, and then they gave a picture of a worksheet. Well, if you found those worksheets, if you happen to write those in school, tedious and boring, you could have those two sources talk to each other. One of the other sources, if you want to go on the opposite side, one of the other sources was talking about how cursive is great for fine motor skills. Well, you could use that same worksheet because it's a worksheet, it's neutral. And you could say how cursive writing is necessary to students' fine motor development. And then you could say, like, for instance, when students are having to trace the letters repeatedly, it is helping them learn those fine motor skills. And then you could reference the worksheet. So you want to find like the conversation, meaning you want to find overlap among the sources. So ideally, we try to put 2 sources per paragraph. That's a recommendation, not a rule. But usually when I see a synthesis essay where it's 3 body paragraphs, and it's like 1 source per paragraph, usually those feel really disconnected and disjointed. So it's better to try for 2 sources per paragraph, and 2 body paragraphs is fine. All right, let's see what other questions we've got. Does the conclusion make it stronger? It can, but that's not guaranteed. A lot of times we see a conclusion that's actually kind of weakening the essay, because it's like, if you're just going to say, and these are the reasons why, whatever you're talking about, that's not helpful. But if you can write a developed conclusion where you're really thinking about the deeper implications and situating it in a broader context, maybe including an appropriate call to action, yes, that could help. So conclusions are not required. If you do not have time for one, don't write it. What's the difference between a 3 and a 4 in evidence and commentary? Great question. So basically, the way I explain it to my students is, let's say you have an essay with 2 body paragraphs. If I give a student a 3, it's because 1 body paragraph was developed enough and it met the expectations for that essay, which that'll vary depending on which essay we're talking about. The other body paragraph might have been close, but it didn't quite get there. Now, if I have an essay where both body paragraphs achieve that objective, then that would be more likely to score a 4, because a 4, it says it has to be like consistent and uniform. So it has to be strong throughout the whole thing. Whereas a 3, it has to get there, but it can be inconsistent, if that makes sense. Should I study historic events, or is that not necessary? I would choose maybe a few that you are interested in, maybe stuff that you've already reviewed in school that you think could be helpful. Just choose a few, maybe listen to a podcast, a TED Talk, watch a documentary if you want to. But I would just choose a couple of them and see if you can like kind of brush up on that if you wanted to. I don't think it's totally necessary, but could it be helpful? Yes. So if you have the time, absolutely brush up on historical evidence, or maybe if you're interested in sports, like look up a couple athletes that you really like, things like that. Is the introduction important, or is writing our claim enough? Okay, so great question. Technically, writing a thesis is enough. That's your worst case scenario though. Do not write a long intro, but if you could have a few sentences before your thesis, that can be helpful. I usually tell my students to aim for like 3 sentences. And the reason why is because if you just have a thesis, it's very like abrupt. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like this is a weird analogy, but it's like starting a conversation with somebody where you just like go right into what you're talking about. Like there's no hi, how are you? Or like lead up. It's just like, boom, here's what I need. So those essays do kind of feel abrupt, but I don't think it detracts from the score. So worst case scenario, just the thesis, but ideally a couple sentences and then the thesis. Whenever I see students writing these huge intro paragraphs, I'm like, oh, you are not managing your time correctly, in my opinion, because you've only got 40 minutes. You want to be spending your time on those body paragraphs because that's where you're going to get your evidence and commentary points. What should the intro be about? Like context, yes. So, okay, synthesis, your intro is probably going to be kind of like, here's the issue. You may or may not want to define the topic. Last year it was STEM, and like, oh, so many essays defined what STEM was. You don't need to do that, but some people do. So you could talk about a common approach is like, okay, here's what people say about this issue, and then here's my thesis. Sometimes we see a lot of sentences of like, this has become a really prevalent topic in the world today, and here's why, and that's fine. So a couple sentences as like context for synthesis. For rhetorical analysis, your context is going to be the rhetorical situation. So talk about like what is happening, like why is the person speaking, things like that. You can incorporate that all into a thesis. In fact, like I have sentence frames and videos on my channel where it kind of puts it all in one. But ideally, give us a sentence or two that tells us the rhetorical situation and then have your thesis. And for argument, a lot of people try to like quote the quote in the prompt. Please don't do that. And I say that because like it's just wasting your time to copy the quote. You don't even need to reference who said the quote, because what they really care about is your opinion on the topic, and not opinion, but like your position on the topic. So honestly, for argument, if I had to write an argument essay and I was stuck, I would just write a thesis because there, you don't need to dive into it too much. You can do that in the body paragraphs, just my opinion. Now, are there ways to develop it? Yes. But if you are pressed for time or if you're getting stuck, do not stress about your intro. Just do a thesis. Do you have any predictions for the topics? So, okay. I almost sort of predicted it a couple years ago. It was not really a prediction, but like I had said at one point, they had done the beginning of excuse me. It was like an intro to a speech. And that really threw students off because it was the Louvre prompt. They didn't realize that it wasn't her whole speech. And so I said, I wonder if they're going to do a conclusion at some point. And then the year that they had the Gandhi prompt, it was the conclusion of his letter. So it wasn't his whole letter, it was just the end. So be mindful of that. Like if they say it's an excerpt, it's a portion of the speech. If they say it's the intro, it's just the beginning. If they say the conclusion, it's just the end. Now, some speeches are short and it's the whole thing. Here's what I'm worried about. It's not a prediction, but here's what I'm worried about. We've seen a lot of philosophical type Q3 prompts, but on AP Classroom, they have a couple prompts where it's like, I don't know, assert a position on whether or not schools should ban cell phones. And that is a cool topic to write about. And I think students can definitely do it, but I think my students would be like, wait, what? Because I think it'd be kind of hard to come up with like evidence on the spot. But you could definitely use like personal experience and stuff. Because that's like another way that they could kind of throw a possible curveball. I don't know that they're going to do that though. I assume, let's see, if I had to make a prediction, they've used diverse speakers in recent years. So I like that trend. They've used a lot of contemporary stuff and American stuff. So I would not be surprised if they threw in some kind of like world leader instead of an American person. I do think that there's a really good chance it's going to be something from a politician, but that's not really a fair prediction. Here's why I say that. If it's an American politician and they're in office when they're speaking, it's in public domain, and then the College Board doesn't have to buy the copyright, which is why I think they pull from a lot of like political stuff, like speeches from politicians. So I don't know. I would just say kind of like be prepared for anything, but we've seen a lot of trends of like for rhetorical analysis, we've seen a lot of speeches. And I'm waiting for them to not do a speech because they've done so many speeches and letters, but I'm waiting for like an article. But I like the speeches and letters because they have a clear rhetorical situation. So I think that's why they do it. So yeah, no real predictions. But I do try to like when I come up with prompts for my students, I try to balance stuff that the College Board has done and then stuff that like I create to try to get them used to like new topics potentially. If I don't finish one of my essays, is there a chance I could still pass? Yes. Okay, let's talk about worst case scenario. You don't finish an essay. Let's say you have 5 minutes left and you just have an intro and you're working on that body paragraph. Make that first body paragraph the best you can. And then if you have like a minute or two, you can start the second one. But like you can actually score okay with a thesis and one paragraph. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but let's think about it. You could get your thesis point, and then in your body paragraph, if you have specific evidence and you have commentary, if you have the word because, if you have the word shows, and you have a couple sentences of commentary, you can get a 120, which is it's not the score we want, but it's not a bad score given the circumstances. So please attempt every essay. And yeah, if you are like, I have 0 time left, thesis, quick body paragraph, thesis, evidence, commentary, and you should at least get some points for that. Don't leave it blank. Can you go over the outline, like what you need to have for each essay? Yes. Okay. So first of all, you need a thesis, which is going to be part of your intro. Ideally, you'll have a couple sentences in your intro plus a thesis. Worst case scenario, just a thesis. You should have either 2 or 3 body paragraphs, whichever one you think is best. 2 is fine. We look for quality over quantity. Your body paragraph should have a topic sentence. That's going to tell us your claim. Think of it as like the what and why of the paragraph. Then you need specific evidence, which depending on which prompt we're talking about looks a little different, but you need evidence. That evidence should be followed by commentary, which explains the significance of your evidence. If you want to, most of my students do a second layer, which means like they have more evidence. So they have a transition word and they have more evidence, more commentary, and then a concluding sentence. Your concluding sentence should tie up your paragraph or like wrap it up. Don't preview new ideas, restate it. Like it's kind of like the concluding sentence is really similar to the topic sentence. Like wrap everything up, tie it back to your thesis. And then you can, if you have time, do a conclusion paragraph. If not, leave that out. If you have time and you want to, then you can do a counter argument. But again, that's not necessary. Oh yeah, please don't think you're gonna fail. Just if you have an unfinished essay, I actually tell my students, and I don't think this matters, but like I still tell them to do it. If they are not finished, I tell them to write DNF at the bottom, like did not finish. It shouldn't change your score, but I don't know. I just feel better when they do that because I'm like, okay, yeah, you didn't finish. But I've seen essays where like the person literally stopped in the middle of a sentence because time was called and it didn't impact their score. We score based on what is there, and we're told to read supportively. So there are some teachers who grade pretty harshly in their classrooms to get you used to expectations, but a reader on the real test might be a little bit more lenient. We are told to reward students for what they do well. So please just write as much as you can, use all your time, and that's better. What if they give us something similar to the overrated prompt? Yeah, that's the other one where I'm waiting. I don't know what they could ask, because I don't think they're going to be like, what's something that's underrated? Although that would be so funny to me. But they wouldn't do that. I tried to come up with one where, like, for my students, where it was like identify something that is archaic, like meaning like it's old and not used anymore, and explain why it's archaic. And they kind of had fun with that one, but like I don't know. It was hard to come up with a similar prompt to the overrated one. But yeah, that one is kind of different than the others. So I keep like waiting for something like that to reappear again. Can I just do a really big body paragraph with all the evidence? It's easier to read if you have like 2 body paragraphs. Yes, you can have long body paragraphs, but you want to break it up appropriately for the person to be able to read it. How can you find rhetorical devices and rhetorical analysis quickly? Ask yourself, okay, what are they doing here? And follow their line of reasoning. So line of reasoning is a logical progression of ideas. So ask yourself, okay, what are they doing in the beginning? What are they doing in the middle? What are they doing in the end? And so some of the more common rhetorical choices are things like repetition and anecdote. Sorry, I really need more water, and I did not bring a full water bottle. Allergies. An anecdote is so ANECDOTE. An anecdote is like a short story. like a really simple story that they tell. Um, Examples, facts, statistics, depending on what type of passage it is, that might be common. Um, Word choice and tone are always there. Comparison or contrast are pretty common. But also just like, what are they doing? Are they creating a common enemy? Like, are they trying to turn the crowd against someone? Are they flattering their audience? That's a choice. And then you'd want to ask yourself, okay, why are they trying to flatter them? Usually, like, we got to think about what's their goal here, because that's going to influence the choices that they make. So I would say just kind of anything you see, just kind of note it in the margin. If it's only like one single sentence, then it's probably not worth writing about, if that makes sense. But try to ask yourself, okay, in general, what are they doing in the beginning, the middle, and the end? And that can really help. Can we mention appeals like logos, ethos, pathos? Technically, yes, that's not the best way. So I have a video on my YouTube channel. If you Google Coach Hall writes rhetorical appeals, if you're used to writing logos, ethos, pathos, please take some time to go watch that video. It's pretty short. But basically in that video, I talk about how choices create appeals. And so if you notice logos, for instance, instead of writing about logos or even just saying appeals to logic, ask yourself how you know it's logical and then write about that. So is it the facts? Is it statistics? Is it examples? That's going to be better than like logos, ethos, pathos. So yeah, like I've heard you should explicitly mention the appeals. That you can, but you're not required to. Oh, shouldn't. Yeah, we try to, well, okay. I shouldn't say we. Many teachers prefer that you not use logos, ethos, pathos. If possible, try to use like the English, like appeals to logic, appeals to, and then tell us the emotion, and then appeals to credibility. But ideally, they're kind of like secondary. Like think of it as, you know how a tree has like kind of like that main branch and then it branches off into smaller branches? The main branch is going to be your choice, and the smaller branches are going to be things like appeals and tone. So like the choices create appeals and tone. But anyway, that video is on YouTube and I really do think it would help. You don't necessarily have to name specific rhetorical devices. No, we actually prefer to see you use rhetorically accurate verbs. So you don't need to use devices like anaphora or I don't know. I tell my students, like, I don't even teach a lot of them, but I tell my tutoring students, if when they come to me, if they're like, oh yeah, that's anadiplosis, like that's great, but like that sounds like a dinosaur. I know it's a literary device, but if it sounds like a dinosaur or a medical term, don't put it in your essay. Just like use plain English, so to speak. Use rhetorically accurate verbs. There's not a list of devices that you need to memorize for the exam. Thank you for following. If you're taking the upcoming AP Lang exam and you're not following me, I would love a follow. That way you're notified for future lives. And anytime I put out content, I'm going to be trying to do a few videos a day on TikTok, also doing some YouTube shorts if you're following over there. Well, we'll be going live multiple times between now and the exam. And then after the exam's over, if you're a junior who's pivoting into your senior year, during the summer, I'm going to focus on college prep content before the new school year starts. And then I go back to AP Lang again. So I would love it if you would tell your friends about my channel. Do you have a review packet or anything like that? So my friend Tim Friedis made something called the Ultimate Review Packet, which with a week left, you could still get and use. I have a few things. I have like a whole content database on YouTube of like playlists and stuff. And so that way, if you have specific questions, that's probably your best option. I do have a rhetorical analysis ebook that I made a couple years ago. If you are like really struggling with rhetorical analysis, that one can help. In the description of some of my videos, I have like little handouts and stuff as well. It's kind of hard to put those on YouTube because you can't really put a PDF very easily. So I have to make like a different type of link, but I do have those. And then for anyone who's interested, I offer tutoring on a place called OutSchool. And when you join OutSchool, it's an online learning platform. You get $20 toward your first class. The classes that I'm offering in the next week are $20. So essentially it's free to you because I believe that things should be affordable. However, if you must know, I have 2 children and my oldest, who's about to be 5, just started T-ball and whoo, that's expensive. So is daycare. So I tutor on the side. I'm a public school teacher. And so if you are interested in a 20-minute tutoring session, Um, you can, if that's your first class on OutSchool, you could use your credit toward that. I have some of those coming up. If you do not see a time that works for you, please request one, and I would do my best to accommodate. I also have a workshop, if you like a small group kind of thing. I have a game plan workshop coming up, different days this upcoming week, where we're going to kind of go over just what do you need to do to be most successful on the test, kind of customize it to you. So if you're watching on YouTube, the information for that is in the description box. If you can't access it, let me know and I can put a link in the chat. If you're watching on TikTok, if you go to my profile and you go to my link tree, you'll see the information there. If you can't find it, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to send you the links. Let's see. For a conclusion, do I just restate the thesis? That's kind of like the minimum. You can do that, especially if you're worried that it wasn't defensible the first time. To make your conclusion stronger, you want to try to add a little bit more complexity. So you want to ask yourself for like synthesis or argument, like why does this issue really matter? You might include a call to action, which is like when you tell your audience like, hey, go forth and do this. For rhetorical analysis, there's a couple questions that you can ask yourself to help your conclusion. One is this passage historically significant? And if so, why? And what I mean by that is like, what has happened since then? So if it's like sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Pardon me. If it's like a passage from like, let's say World War II, all right. If you know the history beyond that, what happened, like has this person gone on to do other things? How has this issue become historically relevant? So kind of like that broader context there in your conclusion. You could also ask yourself, if the prompt says something about the message, ask yourself, how is this message relevant today? So for instance, a couple years ago on the exam, the prompt was Sonia Sotomayor, and it was like the topic of identity. So you could ask yourself, how is the topic of identity relevant today? Well, she gave the speech more than a decade ago, but a lot of what she said is still relevant. Some of the stuff she brought up may have been fixed. It might be better. Some of it might be worse. So ask yourself for rhetorical analysis, how is this message or this topic still relevant today? And that's a good way to just kind of expand your conclusion so that you're not just restating your main points. Because honestly, those kinds of conclusions are kind of boring to read, especially because your essay is so short. Could having a good conclusion get you the sophistication point? Yes. It's not guaranteed. Sophistication cannot be earned just because of like one good sentence or even one good paragraph. So many teachers encourage a conclusion and hopes that it would elevate the essay. Realistically, most students don't need a conclusion, or if they have one, it's not going to help with sophistication. So if you do not have time, please do not stress about having a conclusion. It's okay to end with a body paragraph, especially if you need to move on to your next essay. That being said, if you write good conclusions, that can help elevate your essay. So yeah, it's possible. About 5 to 9% of students earn the sophistication point. It just depends on which year we're talking about and which essay, but it's between 5 and 9%. Let's see. I think I got all caught up over on YouTube. So if you have any more questions on YouTube, feel free to ask. Let's see. I'm having a hard time coming up with evidence for the argument essay. Even chores doesn't work. Okay, so here's what I'd recommend you do between now and then. I have this assignment that I give my students called a Q3 database. And what I have them do is I give them like kind of like the chores categories. But I have them pick like 3 to 5 historical figures that they are interested in. And I have them like, it can be ones that they already know well, but I have them write like 2 or so sentences explaining who the person was, kind of like the context. And then I have them think about, okay, what topics could I use this person for in an essay? Is it about disobedience, adversity, courage, that kind of thing? Like what could you use this person to talk about? And then I have them write a couple sentences of commentary thinking about like, okay, what is the lesson we learned from this person? And my students who did this last year, about half of them said that they used something from their database on the exam. So I had them do some historical figures, historical events, current like people who are still alive. I had them pick a couple athletes. In some cases, if you like sports, if you don't like sports, then it's okay to choose something different. I had them write about 3 to 5 meaningful personal experiences. And so if you do something like that, you might be able to readily come up with evidence a little bit more quickly. CHORES is an acronym. It stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experience, and science. Some teachers use Rehugo, some use CHELPS, some use Gophers. My friend Tim Freitas from the Garden of English uses S cubed. It's all the acronyms essentially mean the same thing. Like they get you to the same place. So it's basically an acronym or mnemonic to help you with coming up with evidence for an argument essay. You don't have to use all the categories. It's just like a way to help you come up with evidence. How do I write detailed topic sentences for your thesis? Okay, so do you mean like, okay, so once you've written your thesis, how do you write the topic sentences that help prove the thesis? Think of a topic sentence as like a what and why. So it tells us the main idea of the paragraph. But we want to figure out, okay, what is your claim? What are you talking about? And why are you talking about it? If you would like sentence frames for that, please go to my YouTube channel. I have some pretty recent videos about rhetorical analysis sentence frames, and I have some topic sentence frames in there. I also have some for synthesis and argument in a separate video, and I think that can really help. For rhetorical analysis, you can do something like so-and-so begins their speech by whatever they're doing, whatever the choice is, because or in order to. They continue their speech by doing this because or in order to. They shift from this to this because or in order to. You can even put the in order to in the front if you want to vary it up. You could be like, in order to do this, they do this. That's your what and your why. So those are for rhetorical analysis. Those are just some quick ones that you can use really easily for any passage. For synthesis and argument, you can do something like, let's see. Whatever the topic is prevalent in sports because, or is prevalent in science because. There's different ones in my the video as well that are probably a little bit better. If you're a visual person, it's probably better to look at the video anyway. Do you have any tips for argument essays? The evidence is the biggest struggle. I would say the biggest thing is choose topics that you can write about knowledgeably and specifically, and just keep asking yourself, okay, why did I choose this example? How does this prove my thesis? What is the lesson here? Give a couple sentences of context because the reader can't infer. So even if you're writing about somebody really famous, like don't assume that we know who they are. Tell us a little bit about the person, and that can help with your specific evidence as well. But as far as like selecting the evidence, play to your strengths. You do not have to choose something that you think sounds smart. I had a student a couple years ago. She is now currently playing softball for the Arkansas Razorbacks, doing very well. She took AP Lang because I begged her to, because I was like, hey, like, I really think we can improve your writing. Please take it. And she was one of my most diligent students. But writing was not her forte. And so she told me one day, she's like, I feel really dumb, because she had some really smart kids in her class. And she's like, they come up with these great examples. And I haven't even studied this stuff. She was only in AP Lang. She wasn't in APUSH or AP Gov or anything. And she's like, you know, I just can never come up with like the same smart examples as them. And I looked at her, and I won't say her name, but, I said, I don't need you to come up with those examples because I wouldn't even write about those examples. I need you to write about what you know. And so I said, you know softball. So in your next essay, if you can at all make it about softball, do so. So in her next essay, she wrote about Jenny Finch, and she wrote about personal experience. And it was one of the best paragraphs I've ever read. And I was so stinking proud of her because she didn't need to write about the Electoral College or World War II or all the fancy stuff her friends were writing about. That was what they knew. She knew softball. So hopefully that inspires you a little bit too, or helps you out. It's like, don't feel like you have to write about super smart things. Write about what you know. How do you establish a line of reasoning in your rhetorical analysis essay if the devices don't seem to relate? Okay, great question. Here's the thing. The author has a line of reasoning. They're not going to choose for lack of a better word, a crappy passage. So follow their line of reasoning and keep asking yourself, okay, why did they make this choice for this audience on this occasion? Then I want you to think about, why did they begin this way? and then move to this next choice and then end this way. And the reason why is because they had to structure their speech in a way that was going to, or passage in a way that was going to be convincing. So a lot of times there's a call to action, but it's at the end. Well, why do we put it at the end? Because you can't just start with your call to action because people aren't going to be receptive to it. So usually they have to like introduce their issue, prove their issue, and then they can build to a call to action. So the choices should relate because they made them in a certain order. And if you analyze them in order, you could talk about, okay, here's why they began this way. And then they continued with this and concluded with this. So hopefully that helps. Let's see, I got a couple of people just joining, so welcome. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. We're just going over like basic stuff for AP Lang. I saw something about syllogisms. Where was that comment? My teacher keeps telling us to make a syllogism for every essay. Is that helpful to do? No. It could for argument, maybe, and maybe synthesis. I don't know what you would do that for in rhetorical analysis. I do not teach my kids syllogisms, and they pass the exam just fine. And I don't mean to say that in a conceited way, like I know what I'm doing, but like, is that the only way to write a good essay? No. So if you feel like that helps you, take your teacher's advice and go for it. If you're like, I struggle with this, that's okay too. But like, there is not, when I am as an AP reader, when I am looking at an essay, I'm not like, oh, good, a syllogism. So yeah, you don't have to. You should be logical. That might be what your teacher's trying to get you to do, but you don't actually need a syllogism in there. They can be logical, but yeah, I don't even teach syllogisms. Maybe I should. I don't know. Let's see. If I can't come up with outside evidence, is it okay to use personal experience? Yes. Make sure the personal experience is meaningful. So for instance, like I read an essay a month ago, and it was the last year's prompt, like timely decisions. And the student wrote about personal experience, and it was about how, like, I guess like the cousin had fallen out of the tree and broke their leg, and they had to make a timely decision about whether or not to call 911. It kind of felt fake, like it felt like they made it up. But like then I had a different essay that I read where the timely decision was about deciding to whether or not to give up a sport in favor of theater. And then like they talked about how making that timely decision was the best thing they ever did and why. So yes, you can absolutely write about personal experience. Just make sure it's meaningful. Like if you're like, oh, I don't know, this one time, I have a video about writing about personal experience, by the way, on YouTube, if you are curious. And in that video, I talk about how, like, let's say the prompt is competition. I played a lot of sports growing up. I played sports throughout college as well, and I coached high school soccer and stuff. That's where Coach Hall comes from. So in first grade, I won our school's jump rope competition. If I were writing an essay, that would not be the evidence I would choose because jump rope, totally irrelevant in like the grand scheme of things. But I did play varsity sports in high school. And so if I were to write about competition, I would write about something with that if I was writing about personal experience. So we want to make sure it's meaningful. Just because it happened to you doesn't mean that it's necessarily meaningful. So like if I were to write about like, I threw shot put in high school and college. If I were to write about competition, I would talk about shot put because I have so much more to say and it had such a more profound impact on my life versus this like jump rope champion of Ivy Drive Elementary School in first grade. So just kind of think about that. But yes, you can write about personal experience. And like, do they know if you make it up? No. Last year, one of my students made up a story about her sister and she still got a 5 on the exam. Now she was a really, really talented student, but she totally made up a story about her sister and it was still fine. And she doesn't have a sister. I've known her since she was like 7. She's my coworker's daughter. I still get a good chuckle out of it every time I think about whatever she wrote about. She wrote about Hamilton and then her sister, apparently. Let's see. I think I caught up on most of the questions on TikTok. If I didn't answer your question, feel free to repost it because sometimes it's hard to find them as I scroll. And thank you for liking it, by the way. Feel free to tap your screen if you're finding this helpful. Thanks to those that have commented and shared. That's super helpful. If you have friends who are also in AP Lang and you think they might benefit from this, please tell them about my YouTube channel, Coach Hall Writes, and also my TikTok, because I'm going to be going live multiple times between now and the exam. And I would love to help as many students as possible. And I have tons of old content too from the last couple years on TikTok, and then about 4 years worth of stuff on YouTube. Definitely the newer videos, the more current ones are probably better. I've learned a lot about like editing and stuff. I'm still not like super fancy with it, but I have plenty of content for you to use if you're trying to study for the exam. So anyway, and I appreciate y'all's support too. That's super fantastic. I'm hoping to get everybody ready as best we can. I know it can be really stressful. Favorite past prompts. Okay. Let's see. Synthesis. I like the locavore prompt from like, I think it's like 2013. It says something about like factors, and I don't know if they're going to use that terminology, but I like the locavore prompt because I think it's pretty easy. I love the library prompt because a lot of students have background knowledge of libraries, and I like the sources for the most part. There's a couple on AP Classroom that are not publicly available, but I like those. I'm thinking of publicly available ones. If you want a hard prompt, the eminent domain prompt from, I think it was 2018. I gave my students that one because it was hard, because a lot of them didn't know what eminent domain was. So if you're looking for a hard one, that's a hard synthesis prompt. I would also recommend the previous 2 years STEM and cursive writing, just because they're kind of current. And a lot of the old synthesis prompts are just kind of not how they do it anymore. So those are my recommendations for that. For rhetorical analysis, the hard ones, I think some of the two hardest ones in recent years were the Gandhi prompt from 2019 and the Abigail Adams prompt from 2014. So if you haven't done those and you're looking for a challenge, those are two that I think are kind of harder. My favorites, as far as like approachable and stuff, I love the Madeleine Albright prompt and Florence Kelly. I use Florence Kelly in a lot of my YouTube videos. I also like Sonia Sotomayor. That one I consider like a medium one because I feel like there's some somewhat obvious choices, but maybe like connecting to the bigger picture is harder for students. So that's kind of a medium one. The Obama Rosa Parks one from a couple years ago is also good. And then for argument, some of my favorite prompts, I love the disobedience prompt from several years ago. I do not like last year's prompt. It's worth trying, but the timely decisions one, I don't know. I just feel like it was really hard for students. And I feel like they could have like worded it slightly better. Striving for perfection is a good one. That's from 2 years ago. A couple that I definitely do not like. I do not like the artifice prompt. I do not teach that one. I don't really teach any of the old ones anyway, but that one's kind of, I don't like the artifice one. If you haven't done the overrated prompt, you should definitely look at that one because that one's kind of an outlier. It's kind of different than the others. So anyway, those are just some like prompt recommendations if you're curious, but definitely look at the past exam prompts from the past few years. Glad to see that I'm still on. Yes. We've been on for a little while. What time is it? 3:30. Okay, I have to tutor at 4. It's 3:30 in my time zone. So I can stay on for a little while longer. Do you have any tips for expanding analysis for rhetorical analysis essay? Yes, the key thing that you want to do for rhetorical analysis is make sure you're connecting your rhetorical choice to the rhetorical situation. And so the rhetorical situation, if you're not familiar with that, is I use the acronym SPACE: speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence. So really ask yourself, why are they making this choice for this audience on this occasion? Because a lot of times people kind of ignore that. Like they ignore the fact that the speaker is purposefully tailoring the speech to the audience, or they ignore the fact of like what's going on in the world at the time is influencing the speech. So definitely do that. I have a video on YouTube called something to the effect of like my best rhetorical analysis tip. And it talks about that. It's a longer video, but it talks about that. Also, I have a video about how to write a rhetorical analysis body paragraph. And I think that one could be helpful in terms of like what you're asking. But with your analysis, another tip to help besides just like digging into the rhetorical situation, connecting the choice to the rhetorical situation, would be when you're choosing a quote, obviously we want to keep them short. But choose words or details from the quote to kind of weave into your commentary. So like, let's say your quote has the word us or we in it. Like, let's say you choose like a quote that's like 5 words and one of the words is us. Okay, why is the person using the word us? Like, so you have your quote, but then kind of narrow it down even more. Us is unifying language. They're trying to like connect with the audience. Why are they trying to connect with the audience? Well, what's the occasion? Is it a graduation speech? Is it a funeral? Like, why are they trying to do that? So analyzing those words or details in your evidence can help you dig deeper. So definitely check out those videos I mentioned as well. So the how to write a rhetorical analysis body paragraph, and then my best tip for rhetorical analysis. Those two videos should help. And then a third one, if you want additional help, is a pretty recent one on my channel. It's rhetorical analysis sentence frames. Can you use repetition 2 times as a rhetorical device if it occurs in different parts, like 2 separate body paragraphs? I would be a little hesitant about that because then it's going to, even though, okay, I'm worried that somebody might see it as just one choice, even though you're writing about it in 2 separate parts. So I would pick 2 distinct choices in that case. All right, I'll answer a couple more questions. And then I need to get ready for tutoring and I need more water. Great Propel. I don't know if any of you drink Propel, but my students love Propel. And I go through a bunch of it's like Gatorade water. It's Propel. It's like super good. I wish I liked coffee, but I don't. If any of you have any Sonic drink recommendations or something, let me know, because I've been drinking so much water lately, but I kind of want something different. Could I do a concession in my argument essay? Yes, you can. It's not required, but you can. Tips for MCQ, because I run out of time. The first thing I would ask you is, do you happen to be stronger at the writing MCQ? Like, are you more accurate with them and that's what you're running out of time on? If the answer is yes, consider starting with those MCQ, because if you're more accurate with them, it'll improve your score because you're going to get more right. And then go to the reading, because if you're not so great with those anyway, or if they take too long, then it wouldn't really be hurting your score as much. We want to prioritize what we do well. And then if you are running out of time, bubble in something for every question. Just pick a letter and go with it. But obviously we want to try to pick up the pace a little bit, but you might consider starting with the writing MCQ instead of the reading MCQ, just because if you feel like you're stronger with that, you can at least be confident in okay, I'm earning points here. Also, if a passage on the MCQ is hard, the questions might not be hard. So if the reading, if the actual passage is hard, the questions might be easy. So don't stress over something being difficult. It's okay to skip it and come back to it too, because just because one passage is hard doesn't mean the whole test is hard. So if you open your exam booklet and the very first passage is hard, do not freak out. Do not just assume that you're going to fail the test, because one of the passages is bound to be harder than the others anyway. So don't freak out if it's the first one. Is there a list of rhetorical devices we should know? Yes and no. I have a video that talks about some of the most common ones, like repetition, anecdote, obviously word choice and tone are in everything. A lot of people like to incorporate the appeals in different ways. Comparison, contrast. So I have a video of that where I choose about 10 of them. I've been meaning to update that video, but I haven't done it yet. And I can't promise I'll do it before the exam. But that video could be helpful. But yeah, you don't need to know any super fancy ones, just the more common ones, the ones that I mentioned, that can be helpful. And also acknowledge that rhetorical choices are best expressed as verbs. So if you don't know a name for what's happening, just give us a verb. Are they flattering the audience? Are they acknowledging something? Strong verbs can be a choice as well. Let's see. What should I do if I'm unfamiliar with the topic of the argument prompt? That's a good question. I'm optimistic that if it's something that people don't know, they'll define the word. But last year, people were really thrown off by this whole timely decisions thing, because they didn't totally understand what timely meant. So identify what you're supposed to be talking about. If you are not for instance, the artifice prompt, that's why I don't like the artifice prompt. Well, I don't like it for a few reasons, but some students are I don't know what artifice is. Well, in the quote, you can kind of use context clues to figure it out, but also artifice kind of sounds like artificial. And artifice is when you're fake, essentially. So my hope is that they won't choose something that's hard, where students won't know what it is. But if it's hard, try to use the context clues within the prompt and just really make sure that you're analyzing what they're asking you to talk about. Because for instance, sometimes there's a topic that students are familiar with, but they misread it. So for instance, a couple years ago, it was the value of striving for perfection, but a lot of kids wrote about the value of perfection. and said it wasn't valuable, which is fine. You can say that striving for perfection is not valuable, but writing about perfection is different than writing about striving for perfection, and they wanted striving for perfection. So I would like literally underline it in the prompt. Assert a position on, and then whatever they say, underline that, because that's what you want to be writing about. How many total sources should you put evidence into conversation with each other? Okay, so like for synthesis, you need 3 total sources in your essay. I recommend 2 per paragraph because that's going to help create that conversation. It's okay to reuse the same source more than once. However, you still need 3 total sources. So if you do like A and B in one paragraph and B and C in the other paragraph, you've used A, B, C, that's 3 sources. So a lot of my students use like 4. Do not try to cram in all the sources. It's not like APUSH DBQs where you have to use all of them. It's okay to not use them. Like just make sure you use 3. In the same regard, if you don't understand a source or if you know you're not going to use it, skip it. Maybe go back to it if there's time, but look at the other sources. Can you bring a highlighter for the exam? Unfortunately, no. The only thing you can have with you are for multiple choice, you need number 2 pencils, not mechanical pencils. Sorry. And then you can have blue or black ink pen. So the closest thing you can do to highlighting is like color code blue ink versus black ink, which is not super helpful, but unfortunately you can't have a highlighter. I wish you could though. Tips for the argument essay, make sure that you have specific evidence. Provide a couple sentences explaining what your evidence is. Don't just assume that the people reading your essay know, even if it's someone super famous that you're talking about. And then have like 3 to 5 sentences of commentary if possible, really explaining what we can learn from your evidence, like what it proves, and really tying it back to your thesis. Do you need a counterclaim for your argumentative essay? No, it's not required. You can have one, but it's not required. If you do not have time for it, or if you can't think of a good one, don't include one. Okay, it is 3:40, so I think I'm gonna hop off live now. I'll answer this one question that just came back in, and then I'm gonna try my best to come on later tonight after my kiddos go to bed. Please make sure you are following. That way you don't miss it when I go live on YouTube or TikTok. I'm Coach Hall Writes on both platforms. I would love it if you would go through my old content. That really supports my channel. Recommend it to your friends if you find it helpful. And thank you so much for asking your questions. Let's see, we got a couple more. Is it better to employ big words in your essay to get more likely to get a 6? Yes and no. Make sure you're using them correctly. Instead of focusing on like big words, so to speak, focus on adding in adverbs or adjectives to make your writing more precise and vary your syntax. So learn how to use like colons and dashes correctly and vary your sentence structure. That's going to make it read better as opposed to just kind of throwing in like bigger words. Okay. Yeah. So awesome. Great questions. I will be live hopefully later tonight. But like I said, please make sure you're following. That way you're notified when I go live. And again, if you're interested in tutoring, I do have some classes coming up on OutSchool. When you enroll in OutSchool, it's an online learning platform. You get a credit towards your first class, and the classes that I'm offering this week are the same as that credit. So they're essentially no cost to you. So the information for that on YouTube is in the description box. And if you're over on TikTok, it's in my profile. If you can't find it, reach out to me and I'd be happy to help. But I'm doing 20-minute tutoring sessions where we go over essays or whatever you need. I'm also doing some group sessions where we come up with a game plan to help you be successful on the test. So yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. Bye, everybody on YouTube. Thank you so much for your participation. Have a good day.